Oh, welcome back to Catholic Reboot. Um, I'm going to try to play a little catch up again. It happens to me quite a bit on the feast days. So I'll be covering the feast days from April 24th to April 27th. Many people ask me, are you hearing what's going on in the news? Everything from a recount in Arizona to the attempt to make a new state out of Washington, D.C. And I'll say, no, I just really don't care. And they'll respond, boy, you used to be so into the current events in our politics in our country. And I say, yeah, that's exactly why I don't care anymore. It's just not doing anything for me. I'm trying to recapture my spiritual life because the secular life has just so drained me. And what I find is we just use the feast day of the day and look at the lives of these saints and how they dealt with both the secular influence in their life, but at the same time kept a perfect focus on Christ. It's very edifying, right? And what we'll start to do is we'll just start to let all this other nonsense fall away, and we'll become better spiritually. At least that's what it does for me. It causes me then to do more research that may lead to saving my soul, rather than just this constant repetitious nonsense that's going on in our country and the world, especially the media. They just love to constantly bombard us. And I think it actually deters us from keeping our focus on Christ. So let's start with these feast days from April 24th to April 27th. We'll be discussing Saint Fidelis, Saint Mark, Saint Cletus, Saint Marcellinus, and Saint Peter Canisius. All right. So let's start with Saint Fidelis of Sigmaringen. Saint Fidelis was born in 1577 and died in 1622. Born of noble parents at Sigmaringen, which is now Prussia, in 1577. In his youth, he frequently approached the sacraments. He visited the sick and the poor, and spent many hours in front of the altar. Isn't that a great concept? Instead of in front of the television. For a time, he followed the legal profession and was remarkable for his advocacy of the poor and his respectful language towards his opponents. So, finding it somewhat difficult to be both a rich lawyer and a good Christian, Fidelis entered the Capuchin order and embraced a life of austerity and prayer. He wore hair shirts, iron-pointed girdles, as he used to call them, and the disciplines that were closely aligned with penances. At Welkingen, where he was the superior of the convent during the outbreak of the plague, he devoted himself to the care of sick soldiers and citizens, and animated by a desire for martyrdom, he rejoiced at being sent with several Capuchins on a mission to Switzerland, which this new founded congregation named him to preside over it. There he went through the peril of trying to rescue souls from the errors of Calvinism, which was flaring up at that time. When preaching one day at Fidelis, he was fired at by a Calvinist, but fear of death couldn't deter him, they say, for continuing to proclaim the truth. After his sermon, when leaving the city, he was what they call waylaid by a body of his enemies who attacked him and tried to force him to embrace their so-called Calvinistic reform. But he said, I came to refute your errors, not to embrace them. I will never renounce Catholic doctrine, which is the truth of all ages, and I fear not death. On this, they basically grabbed him, and then with daggers, they killed him. He was actually known as the first martyr of the propaganda created by Calvinism. So losing his life for Christ, went to heaven as a martyr, and succeeded in fulfilling his destiny in his life. The next saint is Saint Mark the Evangelist. We don't know when Saint Mark was born. We do know that he died. His feast, he died in 63 AD. His feast day is April 25th. Now, this is the same Mark of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. There's this great, I don't know if it's a play or performance that they're doing on the writings of St. Mark. They do a 2-hour presentation of all his writings of the Gospel, and they try to make it almost sound like a current news event. It's not bad if you can last through it. Sorry, got away there. St. Mark was converted to the faith by Christ himself, who then inspired him through St. Peter. And he had actually later accompanied to Rome, acting there as Peter's secretary or interpreter. When Peter wrote his epistle to the churches of Asia, he affectionately joined his own salutation that of his faithful companion, who he calls my son Mark. The Roman people basically embraced St. Mark to put in writing for them the substance of St. Peter's, what they call frequent discourses on Christ's life. Now this is, I don't know if many of you know that, this is where the Gospels of Mark come from. He basically wrote down the accounts directly from St. Peter. So Mark, the evangelist, did under what they call the eye with an expression which was sanctioned by the apostles to write the Gospels. And every page of his writings, he gave this graphic demonstration of the Gospel on what it was to come from St. Peter's character, that the use of the Father's name is really, could be called Peter's Gospel, right? St. Mark was then sent to Egypt to found the Church of Alexandria. There his disciples became the wonder of the world for their piety. St. Jerome speaks of St. Mark as the father of anchorites who at a later time thrown the Egyptian deserts. So they basically worked through there. There too he set up the first Christian school, the fruitful mother of many of the illustrious doctors and bishops in the future of the church. After governing for many years, St. Mark was seized one day by a heathen, dragged by ropes over stones, and thrown into prison. The next morning he was tortured repeatedly, and after receiving the consolation of the sight of the angels and the voice of Jesus, St. Mark died. It is said St. Mark that we owe many kind of these pictorial visions of of the gospel that he gives, because he was very creative in identifying the scenes. And they say, he was able to visualize the very gestures and appearance of Christ. It is he alone who notes that in the temptation, Jesus was with the beasts. So giving that very dramatic. And that he slept in the boat on a pillow. That he embraced the little children. He alone preserved for us the command, "Peace be still," by which the storm was quelled. So St. Mark was not only a very good writer, but he had the way to stir up the spirit of the reader or listener. The next saints are Saint Cletus and Marcellinus. Their feast days are celebrated on the same day, which is April 26. Saint Cletus was a pope and a martyr. Not sure when he was born, but he died in 89 AD. Saint Marcellinus was also a pope and a martyr. Not sure when he was born, but he died in 304. Saint Cletus was the third bishop of Rome, succeeding Saint Linus, which they say the circumstances alone basically commend his virtue among the first disciples of St. Peter in the West. A church and hospital were founded by him through the ruins of and rebuilding of several of the churches that survived even until the 18th century. And the memory of his charity was so well known by the Romans that the crucifiers, who then were still serving, considered him their founder. However, St. Cletus was martyred after the peaceful reign of Emperor Titus, when Domitian replaced him. The date was April 26th of the year 89. He was buried near St. Peter in the Vatican, where his relics are still. St. Marcellinus, who was of Roman origin, almost like St. Paul, succeeded St. Caius as Bishop of Rome in 296. About that time, Diocletian set himself up for up as a deity, right? Claiming to have divine honors. So in those times of persecution, 17,000 Christians of all ages and sexes were put to death in various provinces. Churches were destroyed, and there was a significant number of martyrs. Saint Marcellinus was beheaded with 3 others, and their bodies remained without a burial in the Forum for 36 days in order to strike fear into hearts of the fellow Christians. It was on April 26th in the year 304 that a priest named Marcel came at night with other priests and deacons of Rome. They gathered up their relics, which they laid to rest in the Priscilla catacomb. The next saint is St. Peter Canisius. We celebrate his feast day on April 27th. St. Peter was considered a doctor of the church. He was born in 1521 and died in 1597. He was born into a distinguished family of Holland. St. Peter studied in Cologne and received his license as a doctor of civil law, and then he went to Belgium to learn canon law. These studies followed close upon the days when Luther had burnt the papal bulls at Wittenberg, Germany. Soon St. Peter became a Jesuit, was teaching at the University of Cologne. It was there when the unfortunate archbishop of that city fell into a new heresy. The Catholics who desired to depose him needed a deputy to the emperor to present their request, and they, of course, chose St. Peter. His mission, which was, they say, seconded by the Holy Spirit, succeeded, and the deputy was remarked by a cardinal who desired to send him to the Council of Trent as his representative and theologian. And we'll notice that there are a lot of saints that came out at this time. and participated in the Council of Trent. St. Peter's superior, St. Ignatius of Loyola, approved this choice, and the young Jesuit took his place among the fathers of the council. He was commissioned to draft a memoir on the exact nature of errors being propagated at that time of the Reform. In coordination with the Pope's theologian, another Jesuit named Jacques Lanez, they worked together. Their work was admired by the council, and then the council was dissolved soon afterwards. However, St. Peter was recalled to Rome by St. Ignatius to consult him concerning the formation of the religious, and the future of their order. Afterwards, St. Peter and two other Jesuits founded a college, in Ingolstadt, going there with only 2 books in their baggage, they say. What's remarkable about that is that the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius and the famous Ratio Studiorum, or plan of studies of the order. St. Peter was named rector of the university by that institution. He was in demand everywhere. King Ferdinand of Rome obtained his presence for Vienna. A pestilence broke out there, and he was most often found at the bedside of the dying, caring for the bodies and regenerating the souls of the unfortunate citizens. He opened a boarding school for boys, and Vienna soon found itself somewhat reborn in their Catholic faith. The famous Catechism of St. Peter Canisius had much to do with the renovation, too. During his lifetime, it appeared in more than 200 editions and at least 12 languages. It remains a monument of the triumph of the Church over error in the time of Luther. St. Peter Canisius had tried to keep his name a secret, but it didn't work. And then several nations disputed the honor of his presence. But St. Peter was the provincial of Germany, once again named by St. Ignatius Loyola, and he only concerned himself with the College of Prague at that time, and Munich. Until his death in 1597, the Apostle of Germany, as they would call him, continued the valiant and perpetual combat of the Church against error. For a long time, forgotten, St. Peter was canonized and declared a doctor of the Church by Pope Pius XI in 1927. I think what we take from the lives of these saints is that they were all dealing with some upheaval in their time, and so it wasn't easy going for these saints. As you heard, most were martyred. Others had to go through a lot of heresies and endurance, and were just constantly moving along through their lives, trying to help correct what was going on in the day. I think we have this today as well. I just don't think we're recognizing it. If we spent more time focusing on the attacks of Christ's church and how we could play a part in that instead of worrying about the attacks on our nation, let's do the dive into restoring our church, much like St. Peter Canisius had to do during the time of the heresies of Martin Luther. I think we're seeing much the same happening in our church today, and we're going to need great saints to rise up and fight hard. This idea of indifferentism that Catholics are demonstrating today, where they just don't care, they just don't want to waste their time. Understand all the great saints that went before you, and not only gave up their life, but worked very hard to save the one holy Catholic Apostolic Church. Thank you very much.